Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have an array of terrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into it, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under this video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it matters. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with today's upload, shall we? Tonight's first encounter. This experience comes from a friend of mine that I used to share an apartment with. My roommate, a guy we'll call Jim, spent his high school years in a little town in eastern Wyoming. I can't recall the name of the town, but it was the kind of place that most people had forgotten about since the trains had stopped coming through. It was a very weird little town, and most of the people living there seemed to be very paranoid. A lot of parents wouldn't let their children outside and play after dark, and all unfamiliar faces were regarded with suspicion. Since the town was miles away from the nearest McDonald's or movie theater or shopping mall, there was nothing for the young people to do except get drunk. That's what Jim and his friends were planning to do on the night this experience took place. A fellow classmate was having a kegger at his parents' house that night, which was 20 miles out of town on a dirt road somewhere. Jim had reservations about driving out there in the dark because that general area was known to be sort of creepy at night. But his friends really wanted to go, and he was the only one with a car. So after some coaxing, Jim and about 5 of his friends pile into his Buick and head out of town. About a half an hour later, they realize that they're lost. They can't find the road that they were supposed to turn on, and it's too dark to read any of the signs. They haven't seen a house or a car for a while, so they figure they must have taken the wrong turn somewhere, and decide to head back to the main road. After turning the car around and driving in the opposite direction for a few miles, Jim spots something in the middle of the road up ahead. His friend in the passenger seat notices it at the same time and says, "WTF is that, dude?" At first they can't tell what they're looking at, but as the car draws near to this big black shape in the middle of the road, it starts to look like a mass of fur. Jim thinks it must be an animal, but it looks big enough to do damage to his car, so he slows down and stops the car about 20 feet away from this thing. At this point, it's completely illuminated by his headlights, but neither he nor his passengers can figure out what kind of animal this may be. Since it hasn't moved, they assume it must be dead and start to argue over who will drag it to the side of the road. That's when the thing starts to move. They all fell silent as they watch it stir. Then suddenly it stands up. Jim would always preface the next part of the experience with, "I know this sounds crazy, but..." He says he can't really describe what he saw because he had never seen anything like it before. The closest he can come to is the thing, whatever it was 7 feet tall when it rose to its full height. The body was shaped like a human male, but it was covered with thick dark fur. The head, he said, and I watched the goosebumps break out on his arms as he said it, was not human. It looked almost like a jackal or a German shepherd with a long snout and pointed ears, and its eyes were glowing in the headlights, the way that a cat's eyes sometimes glow. It was staring right at them. Jim doesn't know how long he stared back at this thing before he noticed that it was clutching a dead rabbit in one of its enormous hands. He had barely had time to register this bit of information when the creature suddenly flung the dead rabbit away and took a step toward the teenagers in the car. Everyone screamed, and Jim slammed the car into reverse and did a U-ey, and got out of there as quickly as possible. Needless to say, none of them made it to the party that night. And today's second encounter. I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years back, myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least as the crow flies from even a known mountain road. I was camping at around 7,000 feet that night, or right where the tree line starts to thin out. So when we get to the campsite, it's a big open meadow on top of a secondary mountain. It's about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within the proximity of the camp as I put the tent up and make dinner. But I noticed this time was a little different. He kept staring up this steep tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up and barking. Not the bark when he sees marmots. Not the excited OUMFers are lucky because I'll rip you all apart if my master wasn't here. High-pitched barks, but unsure, concerned barks. Now, the day before, I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark, saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers a few days ago. And I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before. So I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. I decided to go climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill while I took my time looking up the hillside for movement, before I went to hang my bear bag up there. There were only trees around to hang the bear bag. I didn't hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So, while still concerned, I started to hike up this steep hill to hang the bag. It was so steep I had to use trees to balance and lean against, so I didn't go tumbling down before making another 5 to 6 step push to the next tree I could lean against. Anyway, I'm slowly making it up this hill/ridge, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I get about 100 feet up the hill, and I hear a whole lot of big movement about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from deep, low growl to a savage, slobbering, flying everywhere type barking now. My heart starts pounding out of my chest, and I start to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in a matter of seconds, because if this is a bear, my dog is going to try to save me, in which he most likely will die. And I'm stuck here. If I have to get off this hillside fast, I'm almost 100% going to trip and fall off a 12 to 15 foot cliff onto a boulder below me, like hundreds of 5 to 20 foot boulders. So I'm feeling pretty screwed about right now. Then I hear my other little dog start barking and freaking out down by my campsite, which was just out of sight. I had zipped her in my tent so she didn't wander off while I was away. So yeah, I'm absolutely panicking at this point. A couple of seconds after, I kind of snap back to it, and I take another few seconds to start and put my survival priorities in order. And call my dog back to me, low-key by the way. He comes and sits against my feet, as my back is against a tree, so I'm kind of pinned, stuck there for the moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I tried to collect myself. This is when I realized I had completely forgotten that I had my headlamp on. I reached up so fast to turn my headlamp on, I basically punched myself in the face. I'm having some serious adrenaline dumps going on right now, so much so that my knees are starting to shake. I get my lamp on and peer up the hillside. I figure I'll at least get a reflection of eyes off of whatever's up there. Peering, nothing, but I had just heard something. We both did. And whatever it was, it didn't get away or sound like it made it too far. I knew something was up there, so I'm kind of just steadfast at this point. I need to know what is up there because I have to sleep here tonight. And I'm out in the middle of nowhere alone. Better to face it than wait like a sitting duck all night, is my thought process. So yeah, as I'm looking up this hill, and at one point my dog lunges forward, unpinning me. He does a fake bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet, and I mean he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement. something moving up and breaking the line of the horizon/sunset. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover. So I'm zeroed in. I call my dog back and silently watch. And what I made out made my heart completely drop. There was something crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me, wearing not camo clothes, but some raggedy crap with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly. Actually, almost like a makeshift ghillie suit, but with its face exposed. I couldn't see its eyes, and its face was covered with dirt or something. But I knew we were standing right at each other at that moment, so I stare for what seems like minutes. No words. I felt like I was trying to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted it to know that I saw it, but I guess I was just too shaken to speak. As I'm staring, my little dog back at the campsite started to bark her head off again, like she was scared, and I also had to get off this hill before it's totally dark, or I could be seriously hurt, risk dying trying to get back down. So carefully, I start heading back down the hill with my dog, who does not want to leave but listens. Periodically, I would stop with my back against a tree holding me up and look in the direction again, just to make it even more clear that I saw it. And eventually, I make my way down the boulders at the bottom. By the time I finally jumped down and hit the boulders, my little dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders. I thought she was barking just to bark. Dachshunds do that. Or just barking back at my dog. But when I got there, my little dog had somehow gotten out of the tent and was walking around the camp growling with her tail sticking straight up. Still trying to hold it together, I thought, okay, maybe she got her nose between the zippers and worked her way out. But I was positive that I had zipped it, so the zipper tap openings were at the very top of the tent door, out of reach. So in a mixture of being terrified and ticked off, and the feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my .40. I fired a single shot into the air as the sun was setting, climbed into the tent without eating, and lay with my gun next to me until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I was packing up my crap and leaving, heading back down the mountain. It sucks. It was all downhill back, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time I made it to the last camp, about 4 miles from my vehicle. But thankfully, there were other people there. We sat around the fire they made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe. They start to tell me that they are planning to head the way where I was the night before. So I tell them my experience. Needless to say, we're both walking back to our cars in the morning. Screw all that. The thing that still creeps me out to this day, though, is when I got home I started to research reviews on the same hike I was on. Other people had similar experiences like mine as well. Even a man found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago. And a woman was found dead last year. Today's third experience. This happened about 6 years ago. I was dog sitting for a family friend of my then girlfriend's family for some extra money. I would go over to their house once in the morning and once in the evening to feed their dog and walk it around their backyard on a leash to do its business. It was a smaller dog, one of those that seems to be overcompensating for its size by trying to be big and bad and scary, barking at everything with no fear. I was doing this for a solid week. On the second to last night I was over there, I was walking the dog in the backyard as usual. It's fairly dark at this time, not pitch black, but dark enough that you couldn't comfortably walk around without a light. The moon was out, so that helped a bit, but I also had my phone's flashlight on. The backyard was not fenced, hence the leash, and it was probably a good 15 feet of flat ground before it came to thick tall grass weed type foliage. Behind that was just woods. The dog always took a long time sniffing around every damn weed rock you have. Then it suddenly froze, as if too scared to move a muscle, At the same time, I hear this rustling maybe 20 feet ahead of me and to my right. I shine my phone's flashlight over to that direction, but it was obviously not helpful. The rustling grew louder, but did not sound like it was getting any closer to me. Finally, I started seeing the tall grassy foliage start to move, and then I saw something emerge from it. It was the size similar to that of an adult black bear, but it was covered in skin that was a whitish color. It wasn't filled out or bulbous like a bear, but seemed rather lean instead. Imagine a large white gorilla, but with no hair, hunched down on its front arms and legs. I didn't make out any grunting or growling noises, and somehow it looked like it was moving in a slow motion. The dog, which would normally bark at anything, started to whimper. At this point, my eyes had started to adjust to the dim light, and I saw the thing turn its head toward me. I don't believe it had a face. I ran back to the house with the dog so fast I would have beaten Usain Bolt. The next day I went out with the actual flashlight, but nothing out of the ordinary happened. A little info on where it happened. This was in a residential area, just another neighborhood with woods in it. This was in Lawrenceville, Georgia, about fall season. I remember there were leaves everywhere, and it was sort of damp and chilly fall weather. So, anyways, I have not told a soul about this until now. I don't live there anymore, or else I'd probably go back and investigate. Today's third experience. To start this off, I live in Oregon, a stone's throw away from the Willamette River outside of Corvallis. This past summer, my family and I were constantly going out to the water to kayak and canoe. My brother and my dad decided to do an overnight 20-mile trip together in a canoe. First day goes great. They get their camping destination on the side of the river just outside of Albany. It was fairly a wooded area with a rocky beach. They set up camp and made a fire and decided to sleep in the canoe on land. It's important to point this out that my dad is an experienced outdoorsman. He's lived all over the world and has experienced tons of different animals in the wild. He has animal encounters with bear, cougar, kangaroos, etc., you name it. My brother and my dad woke up to some strange noises in the woods next to them. And when I say strange, it made my dad pack up camp in 5 minutes and push them back into the water in the dead of night. As they slowly floated away, they continued to hear it. He said it sounded like screaming, but he knew it was not a human sound. And it was none he had ever heard before. The whole time they were in the water that night, they heard it. Fast forward to a month. I go out to the Willamette to do a solo kayaking trip to an island that's really awesome to camp at. My BF was to meet me there the next morning, and my brother and his family would be there a day after. Now, I'm pretty safety oriented when it comes to camping by myself, especially at a place that's frequented by boaters. I always pack my firearm just in case. I'm a small female, so it just makes me feel safe anyway. The first night there alone, I was in my tent asleep, and was awoken up at 3 a.m. to the sound like something was throwing giant rocks into the river on the other side of the island. It was a very wooded island, and you could not see the other side from where I was located. I thought to myself, maybe it was just some other people on the island, and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard it again, and this time it was all around me. It was like something was throwing giant rocks every minute from different places on the river. I'd never heard anything like this before. Then I heard what sounded like an aluminum boat scraping up against rocks on the other side of the small inlet in the river I was on. I quietly looked out my tent and saw nothing. The moon was almost full, so I could see pretty well. I thought maybe someone was night fishing, but there was nothing, and continued to hear loud dropping noises. The next day my BF arrives. I told him about the noises, and he didn't think much of it. until that night. We had been sleeping, and again I was woken up at around 3 a.m. to the same noises, the rocks being dropped into the water all around the island, and then some sort of, I don't know how to explain the noise I heard. I've searched everywhere on YouTube looking up animal noises, and I've not found one that matches what I heard. It was almost a growl, but screaming. I've looked up every cougar noise I could find, and it wasn't that. I woke up my BF, and I was terrified. He also heard it as well and was scared. The noises were coming from the same bank. I heard the metal noise bump up against the beach. It was loud. And then it sounded like there were two of them fighting. We again looked out the tent, and the moon was even brighter, but saw nothing, which is strange because it sounded like it was right there on the beach. The screaming was terrifying. It was like the noises my brother and dad had heard. We didn't end up going back to sleep that evening and stayed up listening. The next day my brother, his wife, and 2 kids arrived. I told them about the noises, and he said that's what he heard as well. That night my boyfriend and I slept like rocks, didn't wake up in the middle of the night. But my brother did and heard all those same noises we had. I'm not sure what we encountered. I know it wasn't anything I can currently identify. Like I said, I've listened to all of the sounds I can possibly find, and nothing matches the horrible screams and growls we heard. We have not been back to that location to camp since, but my boyfriend and I might again this summer with camera equipment to see if we can catch what we heard. And today's 4th experience. I've told some friends and family, but all I've gotten is strange looks. A couple years ago, I was visiting my grandfather's old farm. We live in the Midwest, so as you can imagine, just a lot of cornfield after cornfield after cornfield. My brother is going to take over after my granddad passes, so the whole family usually comes around all the time. I'm a bit bored with the main house, so I figured, hey, let's go outside. I brought my camera with me because the farm is actually really pretty when the sun's setting. Now I have the worst sense of direction ever, so this was actually a really bad idea. I'm a good bit shorter than most of the corn as well, which made it even more difficult to find my way around. I would go through one cornfield to come out to just another one, unable to see the house from any distance whatsoever. After maybe an hour or so of just walking, I finally get to one end of the property. I've taken a few pictures over on this end before, so I know the drill. I get down into that token photographer pose and take some nice photos of the farm before heading back. I must be as lucky as I am bad with the directions because I almost never get lost. That was not a lucky day. I went back into the corn, pushing my way past all the tall stalks when I realized I had forgotten the way I had come from. I was usually pretty good at getting out of these situations, though, so I tried to trust my own judgment and hope to come out to the house. But then I heard rustling, not just wind rustling either, because if you live in the Midwest, you get used to knowing the difference. No, something was moving around in here. At first I brushed it off as just an animal. Maybe it was a particular hungry bird or something, but then I heard it again, and it sounded like it was coming from behind me. It was rustling fast as well, as if whatever it been was running at full speed. I could hear its footsteps as it got closer. I darted out, not really knowing where my legs were taking me, just running. I could hear footsteps that were definitely sounding heavier than mine, chasing after me like a predator. Every once in a while I swore I heard a growl, something deep and raspy. When I finally got out of the field, I looked back. I think I might regret that for the rest of my life. Because if I hadn't seen what it looked like, I could have just dismissed it as a dog or something like that. It was black, not like a black blanket would be, more like a void, as if part of the word was missing in its shape of it. It had long, gangly arms and legs. Its fingers were long enough to curl around a cornstalk 3 times over. It stared at me for a while, like it could read my thoughts or something. And then this big white eyes and void black form disappeared slowly back into the cornfield, its fingers dragging eerily across the cornstalks. When I asked my grandfather about it, he weirdly got quiet. He wouldn't look into my eyes, and he still doesn't. Today's fifth encounter. Some background: I grew up on a family farm that had been in my family for well over 100 years. Had to sell it through a divorce and moving. But while growing up, my dad always said that I had nothing to fear in the woods. The farm was 720 acres, set back from the road. The road was blacktop, but we did have gravel roads running all through it. In the spring, summer, and fall, I'd be out running around with my dog from dawn until it got dark. When I had to come in for supper, I knew the boundaries of our land as my dad had shown it to me when he decided what to plant and where to have cattle, etc., and never strayed. There were many times I would be running around the woods and come across cold spots. I never thought anything of them, as I figured it was shade from the trees. I don't mean cool, I mean cold. It felt good from the hot Missouri sun, but you would feel your sweat get cold on your skin and bring up goosebumps. Maybe I'm overreacting or overthinking. Also, it was never in one spot when I ran across them. They'd just be everywhere. I'd run through it for a bit and then move on. I could come back to that spot and it was not cold. I just figured the sun had moved and warmed the spot up. Also, I remember when the woods would get silent again. I never registered anything to me, although I do recall those times where my dog would get close to me, almost nudging me in a certain way. I was young and dumb, and just went wherever. At night, I'd occasionally see a light or two down in the hollows, but I figured they were neighbors or hunters. I'd hear noises that I couldn't identify. You'd hear coyote, of course, but others were just screams. My dad would comment that they were typical local Missouri wildlife. Again, nothing ever registered that I should be concerned. That saying, that animal was more afraid of you than it, frequently came up. Living on the farm, we raised soybean, corn, wheat, tobacco, and cows. My mother grew a garden, and she had a slop bucket. That was our garbage disposal, which she would dump in her garden as fertilizer. We got our water from a spring before we got city water. Any injured animal would get nursed back to health. I remember finding a hawk that had a bruised wing somehow. I think it got in a fight. We nursed him back to health and then we let him go. Until I was 14, I never worried about a thing on the farm, day or night. I don't know if I was oblivious or there were just all rational explanations. But after reading numerous encounters and weird things going on, it got me thinking. The only weird thing that I would classify as weird was when I saw a large dark shape once in the woods like a shadow. I was out plinking with my dad's .22 and I saw this thing moving in the woods. It didn't scare me, so I started to shoot at it. I think I shot maybe 3 times when I realized that it could be someone or one of my dad's cows. In either case, I stopped. I ran across some tilled ground and got by a berm, reloaded, and when I looked up, this thing had moved quickly from where I had last seen it to where it would be coming out of the woods. I beat feet back to the house and tried to tell my parents, but of course I was 12 and they thought I had an overactive imagination. About this experience, I had never heard any noises. I only noticed it because it looked like a shadow. It was darker in the forest than the surroundings. I saw no discernible feature other than it's tall. I'd say over 7 feet. It moved fast. Within a short amount of time of not looking at it, it covered a lot of ground. And through all of this, there was no sound. I don't know what it was, but I classify it as Momo, as we say in Missouri. This was not at Boot Hill or Forest, but fairly flat, middle Missouri farmland, rolling grounds with spots of timber on it. As I now look back on living there, as I said, my family had that land for over 100 years. People died there, and my family took care of that land and animals on it. From the crops we raised to love of the land that farmers knew and understood. Maybe all of that gave me a pass on anything weird happening to me. My only encounter was when I was starting to become a man, and maybe it was showing me that I needed to grow up. But again, I never felt any evil or malice from it. I was the one who was scaring myself. But with all the stories I have read, it got me remembering, and I wonder. All right, guys, that was today's upload. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as I have. Really quick, I hope that the sound level is better. New mic, new software. Hope you guys are liking it. The interview the other day with Robert was done with the new mic, but I'm still trying to get used to getting the gain and kind of the settings right. So next interview I do with anyone will definitely be on point. You have my promise. With that, thank you for all your support, and may the Great Spirit watch over us all, and may He guide us down that path that, well, we call life.